When I look at these wrinkled fingers, I don't just see an old man's hands. I see a boy, a 12-year-old kid named Elias Carter, though for most of my life I didn't know that was my name. A kid who had parents waiting for him, a little sister who clung to his shirt, a home filled with the warmth of love and innocence. But that boy disappeared one summer, vanished from a place meant to be safe, and the world forgot him. Even his hometown eventually whispered that he must be gone, buried in some unmarked grave or lost to the wilderness. Everyone thought I'd never survive. Everyone thought I was dead, but I wasn't dead. I lived, just not as myself. Before I tell you how that happened, before I unravel the decades that hardened me, tested me, and reshaped me into someone unrecognizable, I need to take you back to the world I came from. You need to understand what I lost so you can understand why the loss still shakes me, even now. I grew up in a small American town where life moved slowly and kindly. Summers stretched wide and golden, the kind of summers that tasted like sweet corn and lemonade, where fireflies flickered like floating stars. My father, Henry Carter, was a mechanic. Big hands, tired eyes smelled of engine oil and peppermint gum. My mother, Rose, was a seamstress. Soft voice, gentle smile, always humming old songs from her childhood while she worked at her sewing machine. We didn't have much money, but our home felt rich with all the right things: laughter, warmth, arguments that ended in hugs, and the steady comfort of knowing we belonged to each other. But the heart of my childhood wasn't my parents. It was Lily, my baby sister, 5 years old when I last saw her. Curly blonde hair that bounced when she ran, tiny missing front teeth that made her lisp when she talked, eyes bright with the kind of innocence only little children can carry. She followed me everywhere, gripping my hand like it was her lifeline. If I went outside, she went outside. If I ran, she ran right behind me, yelling for me to slow down. I used to tease her, tell her she was my shadow. She'd wrinkle her nose and say, "Then don't go where I can't follow." God, if only I had listened. The morning we left for summer camp is burned into my memory like a scar that refuses to fade. Lily didn't want me to go. She cried and tugged at my shirt, saying she had a bad feeling. Kids get scared of silly things, so I laughed, knelt down, and promised her I'd bring her back a shiny stone from the lake. She sniffled, nodded, then pressed a kiss to my cheek and whispered, "Come back fast, okay?" If I had known that would be the last time I'd hear her tiny voice for 45 years, I would have held her longer. I wouldn't have let go at all. The camp was loud and chaotic. Kids shouting, counselors herding us like cattle, the smell of campfire smoke drifting through the tall pine trees. I remember feeling both excited and uneasy. I was 12, old enough to fake bravery, young enough to still tremble inside. We unpacked our bags, played icebreaker games, roasted marshmallows, normal things, ordinary things, and then everything changed. It's strange how trauma doesn't always preserve the before, it preserves the moment of breaking. Some of what happened next is smudged, waterlogged in my mind like an old photograph left in the rain. But I remember a man's voice calling my name. Calm, trustworthy like a counselor, I followed the sound. I shouldn't have, but kids trust too easily. I walked toward him, deeper into the trees. And then, like a candle blown out by the wind, everything went dark. People ask me sometimes if I remember his face. I wish I didn't. But yes. It appears in nightmares, in sudden flashes when I'm walking through a crowd, in the slow steps of certain strangers whose gait matches his too closely. But what I remember most isn't his face, it's the feeling. The absolute terror of realizing I wasn't going back, that I'd been taken, that the world I belonged to was slipping away, fading like smoke through my fingers. I never made it back to camp. My sleeping bag was found empty the next morning, my backpack near the lake. The counselors thought I'd wandered off and drowned. My parents refused to believe it, but hope can only survive so many days, so many weeks, so many years. Slowly, my name became a story, a warning, a memory families whispered about but never said aloud for too long. That poor boy, he must be gone by now. They were wrong, I was alive, but life from that day on was not my own. Still, before I tell you how I survived, you must know the boy I once was. My father had taught me how to fix bicycles. My mother taught me how to stitch a torn sleeve. From them, I learned that even broken things could be repaired if you were patient enough. I think that lesson might have saved my life more than once in the years that followed. and Lily, sweet Lily. She used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, press her ear to my chest, and say, "Your heartbeat makes the sky calm down." Even now, whenever thunder rolls through the night, I catch myself touching my chest, imagining she's still there. That memory, her tiny hand, her warm breath became my anchor in the darkest places. People see an old man today, they see tired eyes, slow steps, a fragile voice. But inside is still that 12-year-old boy waiting for his parents' truck to come rumbling up the gravel road, still waiting for Lily to run toward him with outstretched arms. Inside is a child who vanished from a camp and woke up in a life he never chose. And maybe that's why, after all these years, I finally gathered the courage to speak, because some stories don't stay buried, not forever. And mine was waiting for the day it could finally be seen, heard, and understood. When people ask me what happened after that moment, after the darkness swallowed me whole, my answer is never simple. Trauma doesn't unfold in clean lines. It comes back in shattered pieces, like shards of glass you pick from your skin decades later. The first memory I have after being taken is waking up in the backseat of a moving car. My wrists hurt, my head throbbed, and my mouth tasted like cloth and fear. I remember lifting my head, groggy, confused, trying to speak. The man driving didn't look back. His eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead, hands gripping the wheel with a coldness I can still see in nightmares. I didn't understand what was happening. I was 12. I thought maybe this was some terrible mistake, that he had the wrong kid, that any moment someone would realize I was missing and come find me. I remember whispering, "Where are we going?" My voice was small, fragile, barely mine. He didn't answer. Not then, not for hours. Only when the car finally stopped behind a rundown cabin in the woods did he speak, and the words he said still chill me. "This is your home now." Just like that, quiet, final, like closing a coffin lid. The days that followed were a blur of fear. He kept me inside the cabin, curtains always drawn. He called himself Mark, though I doubt that was his real name. I wasn't allowed near windows, I wasn't allowed outside. Sometimes he brought food, sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he spoke to me like I was a pet he was trying to train. Other times he didn't speak at all. Silence became my world. Silence, and the tightness in my chest that never, ever left. For the first few weeks, I cried every day. I whispered my parents' names at night, prayed for them to find me, prayed for Lily to somehow sense that her big brother was trapped somewhere in the dark. Children don't understand the vastness of the world. They believe their parents can find them anywhere. But the world was bigger than my hope, bigger than my small voice, bigger than a little sister's prayers. I tried to escape once. I waited until he left to go into town and rummaged through every drawer until I found a rusted nail. I pried at the window lock until my fingers bled. When he came back and saw what I had done, I learned what fear truly was. His rage was a storm I couldn't outrun. After that, I stopped trying. I stopped talking. I became a quiet shadow inside that cabin, a ghost of a boy who once had dreams and a family who loved him. But life has a strange way of moving even when you're stuck. Seasons changed. Snow covered the roof, flowers grew outside the locked door, and slowly, painfully, I learned how to survive. Survival isn't heroic, it's instinct. It's shrinking yourself down enough to avoid danger. It's swallowing words, swallowing tears, learning to exist in small, controlled breaths. Every night before I fell asleep, I pictured Lily's face. That was my only light. The only thing that kept me sane. One morning, after nearly a year, maybe more, time was slippery, everything changed again. I woke to shouting, not his voice, other voices. Angry, frantic, then footsteps, then a gunshot. My whole body froze. When the door burst open, I thought I was dreaming. A man in uniform rushed in. Sheriff's badge, flashlight, gun drawn. He looked at me like he wasn't sure I was real. "Kid, you're safe now." Safe. The word felt foreign, sharp, almost painful. They pulled me out of the cabin, wrapped me in a blanket, and put me in the back of a police cruiser. I kept asking about my parents, about Lily, but everything around me moved too fast. Radios crackling, officers shouting, someone covering my shoulders with a jacket. I thought I was finally going home. I thought my mother would run toward me, crying, pulling me into her arms. I thought my father would lift me off the ground like he used to. I thought Lily would hug me so tight I'd feel my ribs bend. But life doesn't follow the script of our hopes. I later learned Mark fled into the woods and died in a standoff. And the police had no idea who I was, no ID, no fingerprints on record, no way to match me to the missing boy I truly was. They contacted states, counties, agencies, but time had passed. My disappearance had faded from the public mind. New cases had replaced old ones. My face was just one of many lost children in dusty files. So the system did what the system always does when it doesn't know where to place a child. It reclassified me, unidentified minor, found but unclaimed. They gave me a temporary name, Daniel Morris, and placed me in foster care. Just like that, Elias Carter was gone. The foster homes were better than the cabin, but they were still lonely places. Families rotated, rules changed, names changed, schools changed. I went from one house to another like a package that kept getting redirected. Some families were kind, some were indifferent, some tried, but I was too broken to let them in. Trauma had made me quiet, jumpy, distant. Kids at school called me weird, teachers called me troubled. No one knew why I flinched when someone raised their voice. No one knew why I froze whenever a man stepped too close. By the time I was 15, my memories of home felt like stories someone else had told me. My parents' faces were blurry, my sister's voice was fading. That terrified me more than anything, the idea that the people I loved most were becoming ghosts inside my own mind. So I held on to one memory to keep them alive, the promise I made to Lily. I'll bring you back a shiny stone from the lake. I used to rub my thumb against my palm every night, imagining that stone, imagining her waiting for me. Imagining I still mattered to someone. When I aged out of the foster system, I drifted. I worked odd jobs, slept in shared apartments, took whatever path kept me moving. Because staying still meant remembering, and remembering meant hurting. And I was so tired of hurting. Still, despite everything, something inside me refused to die, a tiny thread connecting me to who I once was. Maybe it was faith. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was Lily's memory pulling me through every hardship. I didn't know it then, but life was slowly, quietly leading me back toward the truth. Toward the family that had never stopped searching in their hearts, even when the world said I was gone. Toward a reunion I couldn't have imagined. But before that reunion could happen, the world had one more test for me, one more chapter of hardship, one more stretch of loneliness before the first hint of light finally broke through the darkness. And that light began with something small, something so ordinary it almost felt like a joke. A photograph. A single photograph that would change everything. It's strange how something as simple as a photograph can change the entire direction of a life in an instant without warning, like a gust of wind knocking over everything you carefully stacked just to keep yourself from falling apart. But before that photograph found me, life had taken me through years of wandering, years I barely survived, years that shaped me into a man I never meant to become. By the time I reached my late 20s, I had forgotten what a stable life felt like. I moved through the world like a visitor, passing through every place but belonging nowhere. Most of my jobs were the kind people take when they have no papers, no family, no history: construction, dishwashing, sweeping floors in restaurants after closing, stocking shelves in warehouses at night. Hard work saved me. Hard work numbed my mind, kept my hands occupied so my past couldn't choke me every time I sat still. Sometimes I slept in cheap motels, sometimes on couches strangers lent me because I looked exhausted enough to pity. I learned to be grateful for small mercies: a hot meal, a warm blanket, a brief smile from someone who didn't know how broken I was inside. But the loneliness that never left, it lived with me like a shadow. Some nights after work, I'd sit on quiet sidewalks watching families walk by, fathers holding their kids' hands, mothers straightening their children's jackets, and something inside me would ache so deeply I felt it in my bones. Not because I envied them, but because some part of me felt I should be among them. That somewhere out there were people who used to hold my hands, who used to straighten my jacket, who used to wait for me to come home with muddy shoes and a mischievous grin. I didn't have their names anymore, I barely had their faces, but the ache that never left, it was the only proof they had ever existed. Eventually, I found steady work at a shipping dock in Washington state. It was the kind of job that demanded strength, patience, and silence, 3 things I had learned to live by. I worked night shifts mostly, loading crates, checking inventory, moving shipments. The pay wasn't great, but the routine kept me afloat. The supervisor, an older man named Troy, saw something in me. Maybe he saw hunger, or maybe he saw emptiness. Either way, he treated me with a kind of rough kindness I hadn't felt in a long time. He'd clap a hand on my shoulder after long shifts and say, "You're a good worker, kid. Life didn't chew you up as bad as you think." If only he knew. Around that time, I stayed in a small boarding house run by an older woman named Martha. She was the first person in years who told me I deserved a real life, something beyond drifting and surviving. She cooked meals for the boarders, knitted sweaters, tended to her garden, and treated every lost soul who walked through her door like family. I lived there for almost 2 years. Long enough to start believing that maybe, just maybe, I could build a new life out of the ruins of my old one. But life doesn't give without taking something first. One winter evening, a storm swept through the coast. The wind howled like it carried all the world's sorrow. I was walking home from work, jacket soaked, the cold biting into my skin. When I reached the boarding house, I saw the paramedics' lights flashing against the snow. Martha had collapsed, a heart attack. She didn't survive. I remember standing there, frozen, staring at the stretcher being wheeled into the ambulance, my breath trembling in the icy air. She had been the closest thing to a mother I'd had since boyhood, the only person who made the world feel less empty. Losing her reopened wounds I thought I'd stitched shut. After her funeral, the house was sold, the boarders scattered. And I went back to drifting. But the truth is, sometimes drifting brings you exactly where you're meant to be. A few weeks after leaving the boarding house, I joined a traveling crew repairing storm-damaged roads. It was temporary work, but it kept me moving. The crew traveled across states, pitching tents near work sites. Most nights after dinner, the men shared stories, childhood memories, funny experiences, embarrassing moments. I sat quietly, listening, pretending to belong, pretending their laughter didn't make me feel even more hollow inside. One night, a younger guy named Nathan tossed an old photograph into the campfire light. He was showing off old memories, boys with skateboards, a birthday party, a lake trip. The flame flickered across the glossy surface, and for a moment I saw myself, or someone who looked like what I imagined myself to have looked like, laughing with a group of friends by a lake. I stared at that photo longer than I should have. Something inside me whispered, you had memories like that once, but I had nothing to show for it, no proof I had ever been a child. No belongings, no keepsakes, nothing tying me to the world I came from. And that emptiness brought back the image of Lily's face, so small, so hopeful, whispering that she didn't want me to go. It was the first memory I had ever had of her, the clearest, the sharpest, the one I refused to let die. Sometimes at night I asked myself quietly, what if she forgot me? That thought haunted me more than anything. The idea that the person I loved most might have grown up, moved on, believed I was dead, that her life continued but without me in it. Years passed. I worked in dozens of towns, learned to fix engines, learned to fell trees, learned to repair roofs. My hands grew calloused, my back grew stiff. I grew from a lost boy into a hardened man, but inside the boy was still trapped in the dark cabin, still waiting for someone to bring him home. Then, when I was in my mid-40s, life finally offered the first glimmer of light. I had moved to Montana by then, working for a rancher named Samuel. He was a stern man with a loud voice but a kind heart. His wife, Linda, on the other hand, was warmth embodied. Over time, they became the closest thing I had to family. They treated me like a son, invited me to holidays, gave me a room in their house instead of the small workers' quarters. Their grandkids called me Mr. Dan, and for the first time in my adult life I felt settled. One evening after dinner, Linda was scrolling through her phone when she suddenly froze. Dan, she whispered, her voice trembling, come here. I walked over slowly. She held out her phone, her hand shaking, and there it was, a photograph, a faded image of a young boy, maybe 12 years old, with messy blonde hair, bright eyes, and a crooked smile. A face that looked strangely familiar, too familiar. I felt the world tilt beneath me, my breath stopped, my heart slammed against my ribs because that boy looked exactly like me, if I had never been taken. If I had lived the life I was meant to live. For a long moment I couldn't speak. I just stared, swallowing hard, my hands trembling. Where did you find this? I whispered. Linda hesitated. it was shared on Facebook. A missing child's case. From 40 years ago, the post said the family never found him. They still upload his picture every anniversary, hoping someone somewhere might recognize him. Hope, the one thing I had lost, the one thing they had kept. I read the caption under the photograph. My eyes blurred as I tried to focus, the letters blending together through the tears I didn't realize were falling. Still searching, not giving up. If anyone knows anything about our Elias Carter, please contact us. I read the name again, Elias. My breath caught in my throat, my knees nearly buckled. Because that name woke something inside me, a spark, a memory. A whisper of someone calling that name across a field, laughter in the air. Elias. I didn't know it yet, not fully, but that name belonged to me. It was the name stolen from me, the name buried beneath decades of pain. The name my sister must have cried into her pillow for years. The photograph didn't give me answers immediately. It confused me, scared me. I felt like someone had pulled the ground from beneath my feet. But the Carter's story written in that post tugged at something deep inside me. It mentioned a 5-year-old sister named Lily who never stopped searching. It mentioned a grieving mother who kept his room untouched for years. A father who died heartbroken, believing his son was gone forever. I remember whispering her name aloud. Lily. The sound of it felt like sunlight breaking through a window, but even then, doubt crushed me. I told myself it couldn't be me, it was impossible. Too many years had passed, too much had happened, and yet the resemblance was undeniable. The timeline fit, the details fit, my memories, though faded, aligned with pieces of the story. Still, I was terrified. What if I reached out and was wrong? What if I shattered the hope of a family that had been hurting for decades? What if I was nothing but a stranger with a broken past? For days, I couldn't sleep. I walked the ranch aimlessly, the cold Montana wind biting my skin while my thoughts churned like storm clouds. I kept seeing that photo in my mind. I kept hearing the name. I kept remembering the little girl calling after me, telling me not to leave. Finally, one evening, Samuel sat beside me on the porch. He didn't say much, he never did, but his words hit hard. Dan, some truths find us whether we go looking for them or not. Maybe this one is yours. Maybe. The word felt like a fragile bridge between the boy I had been and the man I had become. A week later, I took the first step. I reached out not to the family yet, but to an organization that specialized in identifying long-lost children. I gave them my story, or at least the pieces I could speak aloud. They listened carefully. They suggested DNA testing. That terrified me even more, because if the results said I wasn't Elias, I would lose the only connection I had ever felt to a life that might have been mine. But if it said I was Elias, my entire life would change. I spent weeks waiting for the results, weeks filled settled in me. Meeting my mother was different. She was older, frail, hair now fully white, face lined with worry and sorrow. Her eyes, however, retained the same softness and kindness I remembered as a child. When she saw me, she gasped, and the chair behind her fell as she rushed forward, arms trembling, weak with age but fierce with love. I tried to catch her, but she fell into my embrace, burying her face in my shoulder. She sobbed, whispering over and over, my boy, I never gave up," and I held her tighter than I ever thought possible. I couldn't speak. My voice had failed me with the weight of all those years, with the intensity of joy and grief intertwined. Finally, I pressed my forehead to hers and whispered, "I'm here now, Mom, I'm here." The reunion with my sister and mother was followed by the quiet, reverent touch of hands and faces from extended family, cousins, aunts, uncles, who had grown up in a world without me, yet had imagined what I would be like. They hugged me cautiously at first, as though fearing a phantom might disappear if they held too tightly, and then with abandon as disbelief transformed into a tangible, joyous reality. Every hand that touched mine, every shoulder that leaned on mine, carried decades of longing and imagined moments, and I felt the weight of years lift from my chest, replaced by a strange, unsteady, but undeniable peace. The days that followed were a blur of laughter and tears, of photographs and stories, of memories recalled and imagined ones finally reconciled. We sat together in the evenings, recounting small, precious details. The way our father had whistled while working on his car, the way our mother hummed songs while folding laundry, the way Lily had hidden behind the curtains, peeking at me as I played outside. My sister and I spent hours tracing the outline of our shared childhood, filling in gaps with stories and guesses, laughing at the things we could remember, crying over the things we could not. For the first time in my life, I felt whole not because my life had been perfect, but because the missing pieces had finally returned to the puzzle. It was surreal to see how much the world had moved on without me, how much had changed in my absence. The camp where I vanished no longer existed. The woods had been developed into a public park. The faces of neighbors, friends, teachers, all gone, faded from memory. Yet in the presence of my family, I felt a continuity I had not known I would ever feel again. The years apart did not vanish, but they were softened by the love and care that had endured across time, by the threads of memory that had refused to break despite distance and despair. There were quiet moments too, moments that the cameras and stories could never capture. I walked the fields near my sister's home, breathing in the familiar scents of grass and earth, feeling the wind on my face, and realized that home was not a single place but the people who had held me in their hearts even when I was lost. I slept in my old bedroom once reserved for me as a boy, looking at the furniture carefully preserved, the walls painted the same soft blue I remembered. I ran my fingers along the wooden desk where my childhood notebooks had once lain, imagining the boy I had been writing imaginary stories, imagining a future that had been cruelly stolen, and now finally I could stand in the room as myself. We visited the graves of our father and other family members who had passed, and I knelt there, pressing my hands to the earth, whispering words I could not say aloud before. I told him I was alive. I told him I had found her. I told him I had survived. And in that quiet cemetery, surrounded by the stillness of time, I finally let myself feel the full weight of loss and the full grace of reunion, the terrible sweetness of survival, the bitter and beautiful knowledge that the world had both taken and given back. Every meal became a celebration of life and belonging. Every night I would sit with my sister and mother, my hand in hers, our fingers intertwining, a physical anchor to prove that none of this was a dream. We cried, laughed, whispered, and held each other through long nights, refusing to let the past steal away the precious present. Every story we shared, every memory recalled, every tear shed, every laugh released was a stitch in the fabric of a life finally mended. For me, the reunion was not just about reclaiming what was lost, it was about understanding resilience, about recognizing the strength that carried me through decades of solitude, about seeing that love, even when deferred, never dies. It was about realizing that hope can endure across lifetimes, that the human heart is capable of waiting, of holding, of remembering even when logic says it is impossible. Lily and I spent hours simply holding hands, speaking without words, our hearts communicating the decades of separation in the quiet intimacy that only siblings can share. I realized then that life is not measured solely in years or accomplishments, but in the connections we forge, in the love we endure and hold, in the forgiveness we extend to ourselves and to those who shaped our destinies. I forgave the man who had taken me. I forgave the years that had passed, the pain that had shaped me, the fear that had kept me distant. And I accepted the family that had raised me, the family that had nurtured me, and the family I had finally reclaimed all at once. We spent weeks together, recounting stories, sharing meals, taking photographs, recording our memories for posterity, and each day was a gift, a miracle stitched together from the frayed threads of history. I met cousins who had grown up believing I was gone, nieces and nephews who had wondered about their mysterious uncle, and friends of the family who had held our story in their hearts for decades. Each interaction reinforced a simple truth: love endures, even in absence, even in silence, even across decades. And finally, one evening, after the long day had faded into a warm, quiet night, I sat in the living room with Lily, our hands still entwined, our foreheads touching, our eyes closed. "We have lost so much," I whispered, voice breaking, "but we have found each other." She nodded, tears tracing lines down her cheeks, and whispered back, "Yes, and now we never lose each other again." In that moment, I felt a profound peace. The weight of the decades, the fear, the longing, the grief, all of it lifted slightly, leaving only the enduring warmth of belonging. I realized that the story I had carried for 45 years, the story of disappearance, survival, resilience, and ultimate reunion, was not just mine. It was a story of love that transcended time, a story of hope that refused to die, a story that belonged to every family separated by circumstance, to every lost soul searching for home, to every heart daring to believe in miracles. And as I sit here now, older, hands wrinkled, eyes soft but tired, telling this story to anyone willing to listen, I feel that peace every time I remember that moment of reunion. I see my sister, my mother, my nieces and nephews, their faces alight with joy and relief, and I know that even after all the years of wandering, even after all the pain and loss, love endures. It endures through absence. It endures through time, it endures through the dark nights when hope feels impossible. If there's one thing I want the world to know, it's this: never stop searching for the people who belong to your heart. Never stop believing that the ones you love will find their way back, even if it takes decades. And if you've been lost, remember, home is not just a place, it is the people who carry your story in their hearts. It is the hands that will hold you when you finally return. It is the love that has been waiting for you all along. And so, here I am, finally whole. 45 years gone, but a lifetime regained in the warmth of my family. I am Elias Carter. I survived, I came back, and in the embrace of my sister, in the gentle smile of my mother, in the laughter of the family that waited for me without knowing it, I am finally at peace. Because no matter the years, no matter the pain, no matter the distance, love finds a way, and I am living proof of that.